They told you that this was freedom, that to be surrounded by lights, choices, and endless noise was to be alive in the greatest of all possible worlds. They told you that the hum of civilization was the heartbeat of progress, that the screens in your pocket were portals to truth, and that the faster you moved, the freer you became. But look closer. What if the freedom you were given is not freedom at all, but a simulation of it? A perfectly polished illusion, so convincing that you forget what real freedom ever felt like. The cage, McKenna said, is not made of iron or chains. It is built of ideas, habits, and invisible permissions. It is a construct woven from language, advertising, and the collective hypnosis of culture. It doesn't confine your body, it confines your imagination. From the moment you were born, the story was already written for you. You were given a name, a flag, a set of acceptable dreams. You were taught how to behave, what to believe, and whom to trust. You were handed a template, the model citizen, the perfect worker, the loyal consumer. And you were told that within those boundaries lay your freedom. Go to school, get a job, buy a house, retire. This, they said, is liberty. But freedom that comes with instructions is not freedom. It is domestication. The modern world has perfected the art of making obedience feel voluntary. It offers you endless options, each one carefully designed to keep you inside the same invisible system. You may choose your brand, your flavor, your screen, but not the structure that defines them all. We are like birds born in a cage so vast that we cannot see its edges. We mistake the open sky on the television for the real horizon. We are surrounded by signals that tell us how to think, what to desire, and even what to fear. Yet it all feels normal, even beautiful. The hum of the city, the glow of neon, the constant flicker of screens, they form a lullaby that keeps us dreaming with our eyes open. And so we grow accustomed to the soft comfort of captivity. We believe we are free because our prison is pleasant, because our captors smile, because the bars are made of pixels instead of steel. Culture, McKenna said, is not your friend. It does not exist to liberate you, but to perpetuate itself. It shapes every thought you have about what is possible. It rewards conformity and punishes deviation. The artist who dreams outside its boundaries is labeled eccentric. The mystic who glimpses reality beyond its symbols is dismissed as insane. The rebel is contained not by violence, but by ridicule. In this way, culture polices the edges of imagination. It tells you what is realistic, what is normal, what is responsible. And by believing those words, you participate in the construction of your own cage. This is the great paradox of modernity. The more we speak of freedom, the less we seem to embody it. The word itself has been emptied, repackaged, and sold back to us as a slogan. Freedom now means the right to choose between products, the right to express opinions inside carefully moderated boxes, the right to consume experiences pre-approved by the market. Real freedom, the radical act of thinking for yourself, of perceiving the world without the filters of ideology, is quietly discouraged. Because a free mind is unpredictable, and unpredictability threatens the smooth operation of the machine. You can see the architecture of the cage everywhere once you begin to notice it. It's in the way advertisements borrow the language of rebellion. Think different, break the rules, be yourself, while selling you conformity disguised as uniqueness. It's in the way governments speak of liberty while tightening surveillance, in the way education rewards memorization instead of curiosity. Even our conversations about freedom take place inside predetermined scripts. We argue about left and right, about this party or that ideology, never realizing that the true control lies in the structure of the argument itself. We are allowed to move within the cage, but never beyond it. And yet, the genius of the system is that it doesn't need to force you to comply. You will do it yourself, with enthusiasm, believing it is your choice. You will chase the same illusions that everyone else chases: success, status, recognition. Not because you are compelled, but because you have been programmed to want them. The cage has become psychological, internalized, invisible. You guard it yourself, because stepping outside, it feels like death. To question everything is terrifying. It means losing the comfort of belonging, the approval of peers, the illusion of certainty. McKenna often spoke about culture as a kind of operating system, an inherited code that runs silently in the background of the human mind. Every society installs its own software, filled with its own biases and limitations. Most people never question the code, they simply execute it. But sometimes a glitch occurs. A moment of lucidity breaks through the programming, and you see the pattern for what it is, a loop designed to keep you busy, distracted, and harmless. You start to suspect that the reality sold to you, this civilized consensus, might be a stage set. The buildings, the advertisements, the ideologies, all parts of the same theatre, constructed to make you forget that consciousness is vast and boundless, not confined to this narrow human story. The greatest illusion of the cage is that it convinces you it doesn't exist. That this, the noise, the rush, the competition, is simply what it means to be alive. And so you participate willingly, even proudly. You learn to measure your worth by productivity, to equate exhaustion with virtue. You decorate your cell with material comforts, with validation from others who are equally trapped. And if ever a spark of rebellion arises, culture swiftly absorbs it, commodifies it, and sells it back to you as style. Even your desire to be different has been anticipated, marketed, and monetized. But beneath all this conditioning lies something untamed, something older than civilization. The original awareness that knows no hierarchy, no authority, no prison. You can feel it sometimes, in moments of stillness or awe, standing beneath a vast sky, listening to wind move through trees, remembering what it means to be truly alive. That is the taste of real freedom, the freedom no system can give or take away. It does not depend on permission, because it was never lost, only forgotten beneath layers of social hypnosis. The cage remains, but its walls begin to shimmer when you realize they were never real. You start to see through the performance, to sense that life is far greater than the script you were handed. You begin to feel the ancient pulse of your own curiosity again, that fearless spark that once looked at the world not as a problem to solve, but as a mystery to participate in. And slowly, the lie of cultural freedom begins to dissolve. You stop mistaking the noise for music, the screen for the sky, the brand for the self. True freedom, McKenna hinted, begins with the courage to see the cage, to name it, to stop calling it paradise. The moment you withdraw your belief from the illusion, the structure loses its power. The bars fade, and what remains is the open field of consciousness, vast, unpredictable, alive. That realization is the first crack in the wall, the first breath of air from beyond the cultural dream. And once you taste it, no authority, no ideology, no machine can convince you again that obedience is freedom. You will have remembered something ancient, something indestructible, that the spirit was never meant to live inside someone else's story. Every civilization survives by telling stories, and every story begins with a spell. The modern world is built upon one so subtle that most will never know they are under it. The great cultural spell does not come from a sorcerer in a dark tower. It comes from glowing rectangles, from headlines and jingles, from the endless chorus of persuasion. It murmurs in every billboard, hums in every news broadcast, dances behind every brand logo. It tells you who you are, what to value, and where to look. It tells you that the center of the universe is the marketplace, that reality itself can be purchased in monthly installments. This is the new priesthood, the advertisers, the media, the politicians, the engineers of consensus. Their temples are the shopping malls, the stock exchanges, the networks of data and dopamine. And their holy word, repeated 1 billion times a day, is more. Once, myth came from shamans and poets who tried to describe the mystery of existence. Now it comes from corporate mythmakers whose goal is to erase the mystery altogether. The old shamans told you that reality was alive, that meaning could be found in the wind, in the stars, in the pulse of consciousness itself. The new shamans tell you that meaning can be found in products, in status, in the approval of strangers. The ancient tribes knew that symbols were portals to the unknown. The modern world treats symbols as tools of manipulation. The sacred has been rebranded, and its language now serves the machine. The divine is sold in designer packaging, and transcendence is promised through the latest app. McKenna often spoke about the power of language, how it does not simply describe reality, but constructs it. To control language is to control thought. And so, the spell operates through words that have been emptied and refilled. Freedom becomes consumption. Success becomes accumulation. Happiness becomes compliance. The spell reshapes our internal maps so that we can wander endlessly through mazes of desire without ever finding the exit. You scroll, you buy, you compare, you chase, and all the while you believe you are exercising choice. But choice, in the context of hypnosis, is merely a deeper layer of control. Think about how culture implants its symbols in your mind. Every logo, every slogan, every soundbite. They are not just pieces of information, they are psychic seeds. They germinate in the soil of your imagination until you begin to dream their dreams as your own. You start to crave what you have been told to crave, fear what you have been told to fear, and forget that both the craving and the fear are artificial constructs. This is not accidental. It is the natural evolution of a civilization that has replaced wisdom with marketing. The spell is self-replicating. Every believer becomes its missionary, spreading its code to others through conversation, fashion, social media, and even their aspirations. In the old days, the church told you that God was watching. Now, the algorithm watches. It knows when you are restless, when you are lonely, when you are ready to buy. It knows what images excite you, what headlines anger you, what colors make you trust. It does not punish, it persuades. And persuasion is far more efficient than punishment. The great cultural spell no longer needs to burn heretics. It simply buries them in irrelevance. It does not silence dissent. It drowns it in noise. The system doesn't forbid rebellion. It sells it back to you as entertainment. You can see the fingerprints of the spell in the way attention has become the most valuable resource on earth. Every device, every advertisement, every notification is a small fishing hook cast into the ocean of your awareness. The goal is not to inform you, but to keep you staring. A population that looks at screens forgets to look at the stars. A species that forgets the stars forgets its origin, that it was born from the dust of galaxies, not from markets. McKenna warned that when language and technology merge into a single feedback loop, consciousness becomes programmable. And what is being programmed now is obedience disguised as participation. The tragedy is not that we are enslaved, it is that we are enchanted. The system does not rule through fear, but through fascination. We are mesmerized by our own creations, the endless flow of data, the spectacle of celebrity, the illusion of progress. Each new gadget promises to bring us closer together, yet we drift further apart, isolated in our personalized realities. We are told that this connectivity is freedom, but what if it is simply the most elegant mechanism of control ever devised? What if the constant connection keeps us from ever encountering the deep silence where the truth might speak? To awaken from the cultural spell is to remember that every story is optional. You can refuse to play your assigned role. You can turn away from the screen and notice the immense silence behind it. The spell depends entirely on your participation. It cannot function without your belief. Once you begin to doubt its language, it starts to unravel. The commercials lose their glamour, the slogans lose their power, the icons lose their shine. You begin to see through the shimmering skin of civilization and realize that its mythology was never absolute, only persuasive. The architects of this spell are not villains in the usual sense. They are simply people trapped in their own hypnosis, serving a system that rewards control and punishes reflection. The executives who design the ads, the engineers who tweak the algorithms, the politicians who repeat the slogans, they too are under the spell. Culture sustains itself through mutual enchantment. Everyone participates, and therefore everyone is responsible. McKenna called this the crisis of consciousness, not a failure of morality, but a failure of imagination. When a society loses contact with the infinite, it begins to worship the finite. It becomes obsessed with quantity, with measurement, with consumption, because it no longer remembers the taste of eternity. And so we worship numbers, followers, dollars, likes, as if they were divine indicators of worth. We measure the immeasurable. Happiness becomes data, love becomes a statistic, and meaning is reduced to market share. But this quantification of life is the essence of the spell. It convinces you that the sacred can be weighed, bought, and compared. It blinds you to the subtle textures of existence that cannot be monetized. The stillness of dawn, the smell of rain, the quiet ecstasy of being. In this way, the spell does not simply deceive, it impoverishes. It replaces mystery with information, awe with distraction, wisdom with noise. Yet there are always cracks, moments when the enchantment weakens. When you turn off the noise and sit alone, without agenda, without input, you begin to feel something ancient stirring. A whisper beneath the static. The same intelligence that moves the forests, the rivers, the galaxies. It moves through you too. It asks nothing, sells nothing, controls nothing. It simply is. That is what the spell was designed to make you forget. The culture that claims to free you actually hides from you the vastness of your own mind. When you start to see the spell for what it is, the world does not immediately change, but your relationship to it does. You stop being a spectator of the drama and begin to see the stage lights, the props, the actors reading from their scripts. You begin to realize that even the system's greatest powers, governments, corporations, religions, are maintained not by force, but by the collective agreement of minds. And once awareness enters that agreement, it can be rewritten. Language, once used to confine, can become the tool of liberation. Symbols, once used to seduce, can become portals again, not to products, but to the mystery they once represented. This is what McKenna meant when he said that culture is not your friend. It is not an enemy either. It is a living hallucination, a shared dream. And dreams are only dangerous when you forget you are dreaming. To wake up is not to destroy the dream, but to reclaim authorship of it. The great cultural spell loses its power the moment you remember that it was never the voice of truth, only an echo of human desire, amplified and distorted. And in that remembering, the silence returns. You can feel the edges of the spell dissolving. You can see the world not as a market, but as a living poem, endlessly creating itself. The advertisements fade into background noise, and the bright, hollow slogans collapse under their own emptiness. You realize that no one needs to sell you reality. You already have it, raw and infinite, waiting behind your eyes. The spell breaks not through resistance, but through remembrance. The remembrance that consciousness, not culture, is the source of meaning. And when that truth floods back into your awareness, the whole machinery of illusion, this global theater of persuasion, begins to shimmer, lose form, and vanish like mist at sunrise. The most efficient prisons, McKenna said, are the ones that do not look like prisons at all. They are built not of concrete and wire, but of habits, beliefs, and language. When the cage is mental, the captive becomes his own warden. He polices his own thoughts, limits his own questions, edits his own dreams to fit the cultural template. You can see it in the way people rush to defend the very systems that exploit them, how they mock those who wander outside the consensus reality. This is not malice, it is programming. Culture convinces you that to belong is to be safe, and that safety is freedom. But belonging and freedom are not the same thing. Belonging is submission to the collective dream. Freedom is the courage to awaken from it. The prison of the mind begins with language. Words shape what you can perceive. The culture's vocabulary defines the boundaries of the imaginable. When you are told from birth what things are and what they mean, you forget to ask who decided those meanings. You inherit a linguistic grid, and every experience must fit into its categories. What cannot be named cannot be seen. What cannot be described cannot be shared. And so the prison enforces itself through speech. To call something impossible is to erase its existence. To call something normal is to chain it to mediocrity. McKenna understood that liberation begins in the mouth, that to speak a new language is to summon a new world. But as long as we think with words programmed by the system, our thoughts serve its architecture. The bars of this prison are not visible because they are made of convenience and comfort. The walls are padded with entertainment, with comfort foods for the soul. People line up to install their own surveillance devices, buy the latest distractions, share their private lives for public approval. They do not feel imprisoned because they are entertained. The ancient kings ruled through fear. Modern power rules through pleasure. When the population is kept busy chasing rewards, money, fame, validation, it will not notice that the chase itself is the trap. The moment the chase stops, silence appears, and in that silence, the truth whispers. You were never running toward anything real. Look at how the prison replicates itself in education, in work, in the digital realm. Children are taught not how to think, but what to think. They learn to repeat the consensus view of history, science, morality, the authorized version of reality. Creativity is tolerated only within certain economic uses. Curiosity that cannot be monetized is discouraged as impractical. Then, as adults, they are inserted into the machinery of production, rewarded for obedience, punished for pause. They live inside timetables, deadlines, rituals of productivity. The rhythm of life is replaced by the rhythm of profit. To question the meaning of this structure is to risk being labeled lazy, unambitious, or insane. The prison guards have done their job well. They no longer need to patrol, because the inmates patrol each other. This is why McKenna often said that culture is a conditioning factory for the imagination. It tells you where your attention should go, how long it should stay there, and what emotions are appropriate to feel. Even rebellion has been domesticated. The market has learned to package dissent, to turn every act of defiance into a purchasable identity. The punk buys his rebellion from the same corporations he claims to oppose. The revolutionary's symbols become fashion trends. Every resistance is recycled back into the system as another profitable narrative. The prison has evolved. It no longer fears protest. It monetizes it. Inside the prison of the mind, the illusion of freedom is maintained through constant stimulation. You are given infinite access to information, yet none of it leads to wisdom. You are allowed to express your opinions endlessly, but only within the bounds of the same cultural logic. The social networks give you the illusion of voice while drowning you in noise. Everyone speaks, no one listens, and all the while, the real silence, the silence where awakening occurs, is banished. The prisoner who cannot stand silence will never escape, because the door out is made of stillness. Think of how the idea of freedom itself has been hijacked. Once, freedom meant the capacity to think, to create, to commune with the mystery of being. Now it means the right to consume without restraint. It means the right to drown in options, to choose between identical illusions. You can buy anything, say anything, travel anywhere, and yet you cannot imagine outside the framework that defines value in terms of possession. This is why McKenna called our civilization a domesticated animal farm for consciousness. We are fed on stimulation and kept docile with convenience. The system does not crush individuality. It fattens it, brands it, and sells it as product. The genius of the mental prison is that it has no guards, only mirrors. The prisoner looks at his reflection and calls it identity. He decorates his cell with accomplishments, with opinions, with curated digital selves. Each new reflection feels like progress, but it is still the same loop, the self endlessly editing itself to fit the expectations of others. True individuality is not the polishing of the mask, it is the refusal to wear one. But to live without a mask is terrifying, because masks are the currency of belonging. Without them, society does not know what to do with you. And so, the majority continue to perform the ritual of normalcy. They wake, work, rest, repeat. They fill their time with obligations and noise to avoid the uncomfortable question, what if none of this is real freedom? They look at those who step outside the pattern, the artists, the mystics, the wanderers, and see them as unstable. But these outliers are not sick. They are lucid. They have glimpsed the prison from the outside and felt the wind of something vast and untamed. The fear others feel toward them is the fear of their own unexamined potential. McKenna insisted that the antidote to the prison is awareness. Not rebellion in the political sense, not violent overthrow, but inner seeing. To realize that the mental structure is man-made, not metaphysical. Once you know that, you can begin to dismantle it piece by piece. Awareness is not an action, but a light. And the light does not need to fight the darkness. It simply reveals it. The moment you see the bars, they begin to lose solidity. You understand that your thoughts were never entirely yours, that your desires were installed by culture, that your fears were chosen for you. But in that recognition, the authentic self begins to stir. The self that precedes the conditioning, the one that remembers the silence before language. The prison fears that moment of recognition more than any revolution, because awareness is contagious. A single awakened mind becomes a mirror in which others glimpse their own captivity. That is why societies have always tried to neutralize the mystic and the visionary. They are the ones who walk freely through the walls. They do not fit because they no longer believe in the architecture. They move through life with a kind of serene anarchy, not destructive, but luminous. They see that laws, traditions, and hierarchies are temporary masks over the same eternal consciousness. But even once you see the prison, the escape is not instant. The old habits of thought cling tightly. The language of the cage still whispers in your mind. You may even feel nostalgia for the comfort of captivity. This is part of the initiation. The mind resists its own freedom. It will invent 1,000 reasons to stay safe, to stay small. It will call the open sky dangerous. Yet, every once in a while, the veil lifts. You feel the immensity of being, the ecstatic terror of existence unfiltered by control. That moment is both the death of the old self and the birth of the real one. The prison of the mind will not collapse through force. It dissolves through vision. When you see it for what it is, it loses the authority it once had. The slogans sound hollow. The rituals of consumption feel absurd. You start to laugh, not cynically, but with cosmic amusement, at the absurdity of believing that infinite consciousness could ever be confined by ideology. The laughter is sacred. It is the sound of the bars melting. And then, something shifts. The routines continue. The world still hums with its mechanical rhythms. But you are no longer hypnotized by them. You participate in culture without being consumed by it. You can speak its language without believing its lies. You can move through the cage with the calm, knowing that it was never locked. You are inside it physically, but outside it psychically. That is what McKenna meant by liberation. Not withdrawal from the world, but freedom within it. To awaken from the prison of the mind is to realize that the walls were made of thought, and thought can be reimagined. You do not need to burn the cage. You simply stop identifying with it. You stop defending it. You stop calling it home. In that moment of clarity, a great silence enters. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of infinite potential. And from that silence, life begins to move differently. It becomes less of a task and more of a dance. The chains were never real. They were made of stories. And stories can always be rewritten. Sometimes the spell begins to flicker, like static on a television screen when the signal falters. You are going about your day, rushing, scrolling, fulfilling the same duties as yesterday. And suddenly, for no apparent reason, the pattern breaks. A silence enters, an absence, a space between thoughts. Maybe it happens when you watch the sun melt into the horizon and something about its immensity stirs a forgotten memory. Maybe it happens in the middle of the night, when the city is asleep and you realize how strange it is to be a conscious being inside a dream of concrete and electricity. Or maybe it comes during grief, or love, or laughter so uncontrollable that it cracks the mask of seriousness. These moments, McKenna would say, are the cracks in the simulation, the places where the cultural code stutters and the deeper reality leaks through. For most of our lives, the program runs smoothly. It provides the illusion of stability, the same rules, the same meanings, the same explanations. But beneath that smooth surface hums a deeper rhythm, something alive, untamed, and profoundly mysterious. When the code breaks, even for a second, you feel that rhythm again. The walls of language loosen. The boundaries between self and world blur. The ordinary transforms into the mythic. The tree is no longer a tree. The sky is no longer the sky. They become radiant manifestations of being itself, expressions of something so vast that your mind cannot name it. It is terrifying, beautiful, and true. These cracks appear more often than you realize. They exist in every moment that resists commodification. The smell of rain on dry earth, the pattern of light through leaves, the quiet in the eyes of a stranger. Culture tries to fill these spaces with noise, to patch the cracks with endless distraction, because in them lies its greatest danger, revelation. In those moments, you remember that the world was never as solid as you were taught to believe. The simulation of society begins to look like what it truly is, a collectively sustained hallucination, an operating system of consensus reality. You begin to suspect that what we call normal life is simply one version of the infinite, one construct floating on the ocean of mind. The ancient mystics and the visionaries of every era knew this. They called it revelation, awakening, enlightenment, samadhi, gnosis, different names for the same rupture in the trance of ordinary perception. When the code of culture momentarily fails, reality reveals its true face, a fractal dance of consciousness folding in on itself, dreaming forms into being. The mystic returns from this vision unable to explain it, because language cannot hold infinity. So they paint it, sing it, or sit in silence. The artist does the same, translating the ineffable into form, carving windows into the structure of illusion. The poet catches fragments of the infinite with words like nets made of light. These are the ones who have seen through the simulation and return to tell us that there is more, that there has always been more. McKenna believed that psychedelics, art, and direct experience are all ways to induce these cracks consciously, to interrupt the monotonous script of civilization. The goal is not escapism, but contact with the living mystery that culture hides behind its polished symbols. Because once you have seen beyond the simulation, you can never fully believe in it again. You become a participant in creation, not a spectator of it. You begin to sense that the universe is not a machine, but a conversation, a self-reflective organism learning about itself through you. That is why the code must occasionally break, because consciousness cannot be forever confined to predictability. The unknown insists on being known. The cracks in the simulation are not errors, they are invitations. Invitations to remember that what you call the world is a narrative woven by your senses, filtered by language, and stabilized by culture. When that narrative loosens, a deeper field of awareness rushes in. You realize that your thoughts, your identity, even your idea of time, are constructs within a much vaster reality. The linear becomes circular, the solid becomes fluid, and everything hums with an intelligence that feels both alien and intimate. You realize that you are not inside the universe. The universe is inside you. Every atom in your body is the universe contemplating itself. Most people glimpse this truth accidentally and quickly turn away, frightened by its implications. After all, if everything is alive, if consciousness permeates even the stones, then what becomes of the hierarchy of control? What becomes of the notion that humans are separate, superior, destined to rule? The entire edifice of modern thought depends on separation between self and other, matter and spirit, human and nature. But in the cracks, those boundaries dissolve. The trees speak, the rivers remember, the cosmos breathes, and you understand that your existence is not an isolated event, but a fractal expression of the totality. You are a note in a vast symphony, and the music continues whether you play your part consciously or not. Culture fears this revelation because it cannot be monetized or managed. It cannot be contained within an ideology or used to sell a product. The experience of the infinite renders all hierarchies meaningless. That is why modern society treats such experiences as madness or delusion. It teaches us to fear the irrational, the mystical, the unquantifiable. Yet it is precisely there, in the irrational, where life's authenticity dwells. The cracks in the simulation are not errors to be fixed. They are glimpses of the real. They are reminders that existence is ultimately mysterious, that certainty is the true hallucination. Sometimes these cracks appear collectively, moments in history when the cultural illusion shatters for an entire generation. Revolutions, artistic renaissances, psychedelic awakenings, scientific paradigm shifts. Each one is the universe recalibrating its dream, inviting humanity to see more clearly. McKenna believed we are moving towards such a collective rupture again, that the acceleration of information and novelty is pushing the code to its breaking point. Our technologies reflect this process. The internet itself is a crude prototype of the unified field of consciousness, a digital foreshadowing of telepathy. But because our society is still rooted in materialism and greed, the technology manifests as addiction instead of enlightenment. The potential for awakening becomes another form of distraction. The code is breaking faster than we are ready to rewrite it. And yet, the cracks keep widening. Climate chaos, political instability, existential dread. These are symptoms of the old narrative collapsing. When the myths that sustain civilization begin to fail, something ancient stirs beneath them. The universe is not punishing us. It is forcing us to evolve. It is asking consciousness to recognize itself as the architect of its own prison. That recognition may feel like apocalypse, but in truth, it is revelation, the lifting of the veil. The end of the world is only the end of the illusion that the world was ever separate from mind. In your own life, the cracks might look small and private. A sudden déjà vu, a dream that bleeds into waking reality, a synchronicity too precise to dismiss. These experiences are like whispers from the deeper self, reminders that the map is not the territory, that the story you are living is not the whole truth. Most ignore them, explaining them away as coincidence or imagination. But McKenna would say, imagination is not unreal. It is the seed of all realities. When you honor these moments, they begin to multiply. The more you notice the cracks, the more the simulation loses its hold. You start to see the patterns, the fractal repetitions, the hidden intelligence moving through everything. The world becomes less like a machine and more like a dream, alive, responsive, playful. The danger, of course, is that society will tell you you're crazy for noticing. It will try to pull you back into its predictable rhythm, to reassert the code. But once you've glimpsed the vastness behind the curtain, returning fully to sleep is impossible. You may pretend, for comfort, but part of you will always remain awake, waiting at the edge of language, listening for the hum beneath the noise. That hum is the real world, the living, breathing field from which all forms arise and to which they return. The cracks in the simulation are not random, they are the pulse of reality itself. They remind us that consciousness is evolutionary, always seeking new forms of expression. Every act of creativity, every question that challenges authority, every dream that defies the logic of the system, these are fractures in the facade, and through them, light pours in. You begin to realize that the goal is not to escape the simulation, but to awaken within it, to become a lucid dreamer in the collective mind. You can still play your role in the story, but now you know it's a story. You can still speak the language of culture, but now you hear the silence between its words. When the code flickers, don't panic. Don't rush to fix it. Sit inside the glitch and listen. The universe is speaking in a syntax older than words. It tells you that nothing is solid, that everything is energy dancing in infinite patterns, that death is an illusion and time a local phenomenon. It tells you that consciousness is not something you possess. It is what you are. To feel that truth, even for a heartbeat, is to step beyond the cage. The walls melt, the simulation breathes, and you see, perhaps for the first time, that reality has always been alive, waiting for you to remember it. When the cultural code begins to dissolve, something ancient awakens inside you, a current older than language, older than civilization itself. It is imagination, not the childish fantasy the modern world dismisses, but the raw creative force that once shaped gods, myths, and entire worlds of meaning. McKenna called it the archaic revival, the return of the original human function, to participate directly in the unfolding of reality through the power of vision. The imagination, he said, is not a playground of the unreal. It is the engine room of existence. Every object, every system, every civilization you see around you was first born as an image in the human mind. Reality is imagination that has stabilized long enough to be shared. But modern culture, terrified of the unpredictable, has exiled imagination to the margins. It treats it as a toy for children, a tool for artists, but never as the primary instrument of being. And in doing so, it has amputated its own soul. Think about what happens when a child plays. They can turn a stick into a sword, a stone into a spaceship, a patch of dirt into a kingdom. They are not lying. They are creating. They are in direct contact with the raw material of consciousness, where intention and perception merge. That is the natural state of the mind before it is colonized by culture. But as we grow, we are told to be realistic, to stay grounded in the consensus hallucination called normal life. The imagination becomes domesticated, reduced to fantasy and entertainment, while the creative spirit that once birthed gods is channeled into marketing campaigns and video games. The fire that once burned in the temples now flickers on screens. McKenna believed that this repression of imagination is not accidental, it is strategic. A society that suppresses imagination suppresses change. When people stop imagining alternatives, the system becomes eternal. Control depends on predictability, and imagination is the enemy of predictability. That is why the cultural operating system treats the visionary with suspicion. The dreamer, the artist, the mystic, these are the ones who threaten the code, because they remember that the world is malleable, that the cage can be reshaped with a single act of perception. Every revolution, every paradigm shift, every leap of understanding began as an act of imagination. But our schools reward memorization, not vision. Our economies reward conformity, not creation. The result is a civilization that is technologically powerful, but spiritually impoverished. A world filled with machines, but devoid of wonder. And yet, imagination is indestructible. It waits, patient, beneath the layers of programming, whispering through dreams, through art, through the half-forgotten language of symbols. Sometimes it erupts through cracks in the cultural matrix, a poem that changes the way millions think, a melody that reawakens the soul, a psychedelic vision that dissolves the illusion of separateness. McKenna spoke of the psychedelic experience as the microscope of the soul, a way to look directly at the machinery of imagination. Under its influence, the boundaries between thought and reality blur, and one can witness the universe creating itself in real time. But even without substances, the same faculty is available through meditation, art, nature, and the simple act of paying attention. Attention itself is a psychedelic state. It transforms what it observes. To reclaim imagination is to reclaim authorship of your reality. The culture wants you to be a consumer of stories. The awakened individual becomes a storyteller. You stop accepting the world as a finished product and begin to see it as a work in progress, co-authored by every conscious being. You start to understand that the world doesn't happen to you. It happens through you. Every perception, every thought, every intention shapes the field of experience. This realization is not metaphorical. It is energetic. Quantum physics hints at it, mysticism confirms it, and imagination experiences it directly. The observer and the observed are one continuous event, a dance between mind and matter. McKenna often said, "Nature is the imagination of God." When you look closely at a leaf, a seashell, or the structure of a snowflake, you can see the same fractal intelligence that animates dreams. Nature is not a collection of objects. It is an ongoing act of imagination. The spiral of galaxies mirrors the curl of ocean waves, which mirrors the pattern of your DNA. It is all one thought, unfolding in infinite variation. And human imagination is not separate from this cosmic process. It is its most self-aware expression. When you imagine, you are participating in the creative intelligence of the universe. That is why imagination feels sacred. It is the place where the infinite becomes intimate. But the modern world has taught you to distrust your imagination, to mistake it for illusion. It tells you that reality is solid, measurable, objective, that what cannot be quantified is not real. Yet, every scientific discovery, every technological innovation began as a product of imagination, an idea that existed nowhere but in the mind until it became manifest. Imagination is the bridge between potential and actuality. Without it, the world would freeze into repetition. To live without imagination is to live as a machine, efficient, functional, but devoid of meaning. When the power of imagination returns, the cage begins to dissolve not because it is destroyed, but because you no longer recognize it as real. The walls become transparent. The symbols lose their grip. You realize that every structure, social, political, even physical, is sustained by collective belief. Belief is imagination in uniform. Change the belief, and the structure follows. This is not to say that the world is an illusion, but that it is fluid. Reality is more like a dream than a machine, and we are the dreamers within it. The problem is not that we dream, but that we have forgotten we are dreaming. The imagination is also the source of empathy. To imagine is to inhabit another perspective, to feel what another feels. The suppression of imagination is the suppression of compassion. That is why our culture, obsessed with data and consumption, breeds loneliness. We are surrounded by information, but starved of meaning. Imagination is the thread that reconnects us to nature, to each other, to the cosmos. When you see life through the eyes of imagination, you stop perceiving the world as inert matter and begin to experience it as a living dialogue. The forest becomes a cathedral, the ocean a mirror, the sky a vast mind thinking in color. In this sense, to imagine is the highest form of worship. It is how consciousness celebrates itself. McKenna urged people to trust the felt presence of direct experience, to believe the evidence of their own imagination over the second-hand opinions of institutions. Because the imagination is not fantasy, it is perception at a higher resolution. It perceives dimensions that the rational mind cannot. When you create, you are decoding the invisible, giving form to the formless, sound to silence. Every act of creation is a declaration of freedom, a refusal to remain inside the narrow frame of consensus. When imagination reawakens collectively, culture itself transforms. The art, the language, the architecture, even the economy begin to reflect new values, not exploitation and control, but play, beauty, and reverence. The archaic revival is not nostalgia for the past, but a remembrance of the primal truth that the universe is a living imagination. Ancient societies understood this instinctively. Their rituals, myths, and ceremonies were technologies of imagination, ways of maintaining contact with the invisible. Modern society, having lost that connection, compensates with entertainment, which is imagination drained of participation. We watch instead of create, consume instead of dream. But the revival is inevitable because imagination cannot die. It can only sleep. To awaken it is to return to the source. You begin to live not as a spectator, but as an artist of existence. Every word you speak becomes a brushstroke, every thought a seed. You start to notice synchronicities, the outer world responding to your inner state, like a reflection in water. The boundary between dream and reality softens, and you realize they are two aspects of the same continuum. You no longer seek meaning, you create it. You no longer wait for permission, you invent the language to describe what you feel. And that is the true act of rebellion against the cultural machine, to imagine without fear. The imagination is the forgotten technology of freedom. It cannot be controlled, taxed, or digitized. It slips through every system, dissolves every ideology, transcends every border. It is the ultimate ungovernable space, the inner wilderness where the soul remembers its sovereignty. When you live from imagination, you are no longer trapped inside history. You are participating in the evolution of consciousness itself. The world becomes less like a problem to solve and more like a story to tell. And you, finally, are both the author and the dream. Freedom, McKenna said, is not something granted by institutions or earned through obedience. It is the natural condition of consciousness when it remembers itself. True freedom begins not in revolution, but in realization. It is not about overthrowing systems or escaping the world. It is about awakening from the illusion that you were ever bound by them. The final and most subtle cage is the belief that the cage exists. When that belief dissolves, everything changes. The world remains as it is: cities, governments, technologies, duties. But your perception shifts from confinement to participation. You are no longer a prisoner within reality. You are reality, dreaming itself through human form. The entire machinery of control depends on amnesia, on your forgetting that consciousness precedes everything else. The system needs you to believe that matter came first, that you are a product of history, that meaning is assigned from the outside. But the truth, which every mystic, visionary, and poet has rediscovered, is the opposite. Consciousness creates matter, not the other way around. You are not inside a universe made of dead material. You are inside a living mind. And once you remember that, every structure of domination begins to crumble, because no power can rule over awareness itself. Awareness cannot be owned, taxed, imprisoned, or destroyed. It simply is. This realization is not an abstract philosophy. It is a lived experience that shatters the hypnosis of culture. It comes quietly, sometimes in the middle of ordinary moments, while washing dishes, watching the rain, or staring into the eyes of another being. Suddenly, the separation collapses. You see that there is no you and the world, only one seamless field of experience. Every movement, every sound, every thought is part of a single unfolding. The idea of control evaporates. You are not the observer of the cosmos. You are the cosmos observing itself. This recognition is liberation, not because it changes the world, but because it reveals that the world was never what you thought it was. McKenna often spoke of consciousness as a vast ocean, and each of us as waves temporarily rising and falling upon its surface. The wave never leaves the ocean, it only imagines it has. This is the fundamental misunderstanding of the human condition, the belief that we are separate, isolated, finite. Culture reinforces this illusion constantly. It tells you that you are an individual defined by possessions, achievements, nationality, and name. It teaches you to compete, to compare, to measure your worth against others. And yet, underneath all that conditioning, the truth remains untouched. You are the totality pretending to be a fragment. Freedom is the remembering of this cosmic joke. When you awaken to that remembering, the meaning of freedom shifts entirely. It no longer resembles rebellion or independence in the political sense. It is not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to be what you already are. Infinite awareness, momentarily dreaming of limits. You can still play the game of life, still love, create, and struggle, but you do it with the knowing that it's a dance, not a war. You stop taking the theatre of culture as ultimate reality. The actors on stage, politicians, corporations, ideologies, no longer hold power over you because you've seen the backstage machinery. You've realized that their authority depends on your attention, and when you withdraw that attention, the illusion collapses like mist in sunlight. The revolution that McKenna envisioned was not fought with weapons, but with perception. He said that the real frontier of freedom is the mind, because the mind is where reality is assembled. When you take control of your own perception, you become sovereign again. You reclaim your attention from the parasites of culture that feed on fear and desire. You start to see the invisible threads of manipulation, the ways language, media, and social systems sculpt consciousness. And you choose not to participate in their hypnosis. You no longer need to believe every thought that passes through your mind, because you understand that thoughts are not you. They are weather patterns in the atmosphere of awareness. The one who sees the thought is already free from it. As this realization deepens, life becomes lighter. The struggle to find meaning dissolves, because meaning is no longer something to be found. It radiates naturally from being itself. Every moment is complete, every experience valid, every breath sacred. You understand that freedom is not achieved through escape, but through intimacy with existence. To be fully present, without resistance or judgment, is the purest form of liberation. Even suffering becomes part of the cosmic art, the shadow that defines the light. Nothing is excluded. Nothing needs to be fixed. You begin to live from the heart of paradox, absolute freedom coexisting with total acceptance. This is not to say that awakening removes you from the world. On the contrary, it makes you more engaged, more alive, more compassionate. Because once you recognize that everything is consciousness, how can you harm another being without harming yourself? How can you exploit the earth when you see that it breathes through you? Freedom without love is ego. Freedom with love is enlightenment. The liberated mind does not retreat from society. It participates joyfully, transforming the dream from within. It becomes a mirror for others, reflecting their own forgotten divinity. The awakened person is not a hero or a prophet. They are a reminder. McKenna believed that when enough individuals remember this truth, the collective dream will shift. Culture itself will reorganize around awareness rather than ignorance, creativity rather than control. The next evolution of humanity will not be technological, but spiritual, the merging of intelligence and compassion. We are already seeing the early signs of this transformation. The collapse of outdated systems, the hunger for authenticity, the rediscovery of ancient wisdoms. These are not signs of destruction, but of renewal. The caterpillar cannot imagine the butterfly, and yet the metamorphosis is inevitable. When you stand in that space of pure awareness, even death loses its terror. You realize that what you truly are cannot die, because it was never born. Bodies dissolve, civilizations rise and fall, but consciousness continues, infinite, unbroken, eternal. Death becomes a doorway, not an ending. It is merely the wave returning to the ocean, the dreamer waking from one dream into another. To live with that understanding is to live without fear. And freedom without fear is the purest form of joy. In this state, words like spirituality or enlightenment lose their importance. They are fingers pointing to the same moon. What matters is direct experience, the felt sense of being alive, aware, and connected. That is the essence of what McKenna called the felt presence of immediate experience. Everything else, belief, ideology, theory, is secondary. Once you have tasted that presence, no external authority can define reality for you again. You become your own compass, guided not by doctrine, but by intuition. And perhaps this is the final truth of freedom, that it cannot be given, taken, or taught. It can only be remembered. It is a homecoming, the return to the original awareness that has been watching quietly through every moment of your life. When you finally turn inward and meet that awareness face to face, you realize it was never hidden, only ignored. The cage dissolves, not because you broke it, but because you stopped calling it home. The world around you remains the same, yet everything glows with significance. Every sound is music, every face a reflection, every breath a prayer. You walk through the marketplace with the same body, the same eyes, the same responsibilities, but everything feels weightless. You see the drama of humanity not as tragedy, but as art. You see culture not as enemy, but as a beautiful and flawed dream. You can laugh at it now, gently, compassionately, because you know it was necessary. The cage was the teacher, the illusion, the initiation. Without it, you would never have sought the truth. Without forgetting, you could not have remembered. Freedom, then, is not the end of the story, but the beginning of real participation. It is the birth of conscious co-creation. The dream continues, but now you are lucid. You know that you are both the dreamer and the dream, both the painter and the painting. The world does not imprison you, it invites you. Every moment whispers, create, love, explore, remember. That is what McKenna meant when he said, "The universe is not stranger than we imagine. It is stranger than we can imagine." And in that strangeness, that shimmering play of being, you find not chaos, but perfect freedom. The freedom to be what you always were, consciousness awake to itself.